Okay, so now that we're back out of our recess, I'll turn it over to Kimberly Honeycutt, our finance officer, who's going to review our fiscal policies with you.
Good morning, this is Kimberly Honeycutt. I will say, first of all, I'm delighted that I'm not following lunch. So things are looking up today. At least I know you're awake and you're laughing. So I just want to go over a couple of things with you. The PowerPoint presentation that you have before you, it's in your packages, and also a document that I passed out to you is the same document that was presented to you back in August during the new commissioner's orientation. So a lot of this is just stuff that you've already seen, but as we discussed during that presentation, those were the documents and the conversation to kind of familiarize you with the processes of the county, the things you'll be seeing as a commissioner, the things you'll be asked to decide upon. And then as we actually get to those times when you're going to be asked to make those decisions, just like, you know, you're being asked to rank CIP projects, we will discuss those more in depth. So it was just enough to introduce you to them. So the PowerPoint presentation is the same, because I do believe sometimes in repetition helps you gain a better understanding of it. Kind of helps everything make place, because there's a lot of things that are coming your way and a lot more to come, I promise you. There's never any shortage of excitement. So if we'll go ahead and begin, the first page I did want to actually go over the history of this fiscal policy, and we've dubbed it a roadmap of the county, and that's exactly what it is. It was originally adopted in May of 2012, and then it was amended in November of 2016. Now that timeline is very important, because as you will see in the presentations throughout the rest of this retreat, you're going to see a lot of trends as far as revenue, expenditures, debt, how the county compares itself to other counties, its size, other ranking factors and indicators. You will start to see a movement of some of those graphs as far as our fund balance, our expenditures, different measurement points. You'll see some movement, and that movement is a result of the policies that were adopted and then amended. So basically, for the most part, that policy covers the issuance of debt, how it compares to our assessed value, how it compares to expenditures as a whole. In other words, how much of our total expenditures are restricted to debt. That is a measurement focus. So when you also look at the fund balance policies, it also looks at cash. It addresses your budget, which we're about to embark upon shortly, and it also talks about the capital reserve. So as we move forward, I did want to just point that out. So as you're looking at these documents, these trends that you'll see later on today, take notice of how those graphs start to turn, and you will see a positive economic turn of the county in certain areas. So just keep that in mind, that was a result of those policies. But now what those policies also are is they were developed by boards prior to you, several boards prior to you, and it was an assurance that as you plan for the long-range goals of the county, that boards after you realized the forward movement of the county and came in and followed the same pattern. So it's not like, you know, your years in office here, you set upon a CIP plan, you set upon a fund balance reserve, you know where you want the county to go in order to meet the needs of the citizens and also meet the environment. We have a lot of hurricanes that come through, so you know your reserves are set aside to meet that. So that way there's a consistency to the planning and the execution of your policies. All right, so next slide. So basically, what I also wanted to point out is that there are some proposed changes to the fiscal policy, and those are noted in your slides in red. Next slide. So an effective policy, just as we've stated, it contributes to the county's ability to insulate itself from a fiscal crisis. So one thing I also want you to keep in mind is that when these policies were originally adopted, from then until the First Amendment, we had a huge economic crisis. The county was not in the best financial shape, but we were in enough of a position that we were able to weather a lot of things. But what we also did was we cut a lot of capital, we cut a lot of expansion needs. So what you're seeing now, coupled with the CIP, is a defined plan to not only reestablish what we should have been putting aside and spending in the prior years, but also to position ourselves moving forward. Next. And as again, once I've stated, there are several key policy areas, and that is your CIP, your debt, your fund balance or your reserves, your budget development, education, and cash management and investment. Next. This, the next 2 or 3 slides, we'll cover the CIP plan. And again, please notice that in red, there's one change that we're recommending, is that the general statutes charge the county manager with preparation of the recommended capital budget. So it is the manager's responsibility to develop that document and to bring it to you, which they have done. Think.
Oh, yeah.
I told you I was going to do it. All right, and we can just slide through this. And again, this just continues conversation of a CIP. This is nothing that you have not seen before. Debt. I do want to stop on debt for just a moment. So you've seen a lot of slides in the last CIP presentation that discussed projects that you've been asked to rank. A lot of those, we have identified capital reserves that would go toward the funding of those projects, but there are several of those slides where we identified that debt would have to be issued. So keep those in mind as you go forward. A lot of times, counties our size will set aside capital reserves to pay for items as they go along, and that is your pay-go that's mentioned in bullet number 2. But what we would like to be able to do is to position ourselves so that if we need what we consider smaller projects or funding projects, that we actually have the reserves and the funding to set aside. I think one of the items that were mentioned was the fleet fund. So basically, we purchase the vehicles and then we lease them back to the departments. It's a lot easier to budget a few $1,000s a year to cover what would represent a year's worth of car payments than for the county to actually budget $30,000 or $40,000 every year, because when you're trying to balance your budget or position yourself for an economic or an impending economic downturn, it's a lot easier to cut $30,000 to $50,000 out of your budget versus 4 or 5. So that's that funding mechanism that we've discussed. Next. And then again, this is just another continuation, but this is also where it points out one of your policy measurement focus factors that says debt service expenditures as a percentage of total government fund expenditures should not exceed 15%. As we actually look to issue specific debt, we will take a look at how that debt impacts our expenditures, how that debt impacts our fund balance, and then how it impacts our tax value. And again, we have a policy of 1.2 times the debt service coverage. That is for your enterprise fund. Enterprise fund issued as a debt instrument, they actually issued revenue bonds, and that is based on the department's ability to generate revenue to cover the repayment of those bonds. So to protect the investments and the people who purchase those bonds, we know that our debt coverage cannot exceed 1.2. Next. Reserve policies. This is the one that everyone focuses on, I think, the most of any measurement factor. That's your fund balance. And fund balance is made up of a lot of different categories. And if you'll turn, I placed a handout on your desk while you were at break. The front sheet is the new commissioner orientation outline that was given to you in August. I did not want to change that date or change any of that information. So again, as you're given this information, it's consistent. So there is some familiarity there. But the next page, the second page, is a copy of our balance sheet from our governmental funds. And this is a portion of our audit that was prepared for the fiscal year 2020. And I apologize that we do not have the actual bound books to hand out to you today, due to the additional testing requirements for the COVID and CARES relief funding. We were a little delayed in getting our audit, but our audit is at the LGC, and typically we do not prepare or issue the statements and prepare those books until the LGC has signed off on our audit. So that should be forthcoming, but it is enough that I can, and my draft watermark did not show up that this is actually a draft. So but what I did want to point out to you is that this is probably the one page of that audit, and it's about a 240-page document. this is one of the few pages that consistently you will turn to from time to time. And this will probably, I would gather to say, probably the most read page of the entire document. What I wanted to point out is I've highlighted for you, for the general fund, the category below of fund balance. And as we stated, fund balance has several different categories. The top is what we call non-spendable. That is that's just in non-spendable form. That's like your inventories, your prepay items, and your receivables. As they move down, you'll see a category for restricted. That is the amount that is set aside by the state statute, and that's to ensure that in the event of an economic impact or some sort of financial crisis, that the county has enough reserves set aside to continue daily operations for a certain amount of time. And that is a calculated number that takes into account our expenditure pattern. And that amount is calculated for you there. The next category down is committed. Now, committed is committed for a specific purpose, but it's also committed by a majority of the vote of the commissioners. So where you vote to commit it, you also have to vote to uncommit it. So just to keep you in a branch there. And further on in the footnotes of your document, which I have not attached for you, you have committed for economic development, committed for culture and recreation, committed for education. And the one thing I do want to point out is committed for debt service. You'll see a dollar amount there of $8.8 million. Keep that number in mind because I'm going to move on and then come back to it. Then you have assigned, which is set for a specific purpose, and then normally when we set the budget, we appropriate fund balance for use. That's that culmination of that number. That's all of those fund balances added together. You anticipate using it, but normally revenues come in. We don't have to actually use it. And then the most important number that everyone wants to know is unassigned. The county's unassigned fund balance was $31.3 million, which seems like a lot. And when we look at our total fund balance, $66.5 million. And I know in the past a lot of people have, in some of the meetings that we've been in, have asked, well, you've got $66 million. Why can't you build a school? Why can't you build a pod? Why can't you do this? But when you start to actually dissect the different components of fund balance, that $66 million disappears very quickly. So I'll point you back up to the 31.4. So one of the measurement indicators that we have in that fiscal policy is that our unassigned fund balance will remain between 15 and 20%. We have found over the last few years that 15 to 20% is a very good operating range. So that gives you some flexibility when you're looking at funding your CIP, when items come to you throughout the year. That gives you an idea of this is how much money that you have that you can possibly assign. I would protect it because all it takes is a hurricane or a financial crisis or a pandemic, as we've seen over the past year. Even though CARES money was available and made available, it was not there immediately. So the county's expected to have that money up front to be able to protect the citizens. So anytime a hurricane is approaching, we have a flood, emergency services, the sheriff's department, all of that is put in place. That money is there up front through that staffing, through those resources to meet the immediate needs of the citizens. So then we have the 31.3 of unassigned. Now I want to point your attention back up to the committed for debt service of 8.8. So a few years ago, we actually set aside in a separate debt service fund the all of the restricted article sales tax that are restricted for education, but it's also supplemented by the general fund. The purpose of that was as we pay down our debt and we have debt capacity, that money that has been set aside for debt remains there. Any growth in that sales tax also remains there. So what you see is after a few short years, we actually have 8.8 million set aside for debt, which actually seems like a lot. But I want you to flip over 2 pages, and there's the last page of your handout that I gave you, sales tax restricted for education. What I've done for you here, I've listed the sales tax articles 40, 42, and 46 that are restricted. These are the portions that are restricted for education. And if you'll remember, Article 46 was put in place by a vote of the citizens a few years ago. So when you're looking at the amount of revenue that we've received over the last 3 fiscal years, you'll see from 2018 to 2019, our sales tax in that fund actually went up $538,000. From 2019 to 2020, it went up $605,000. What that means is that's additional revenue that's come into that fund that's remaining in that fund for future issue of debt. For 2021, the amount that was budgeted is $8 million, which you can obviously see is a lot lower than what the year wound up. And I think that for 2020, I think I can go on record to say that that's probably the one year that everyone predicted that sales tax would take a dive. It didn't. I think that a lot of people that were at home were doing a lot of online buying. I think this time at Christmas, with the impact of delivery schedules, I think everyone saw that the post office and FedEx and UPS and Amazon, I think their business actually tripled. But at least citizens were purchasing, so we took advantage of that sales tax. Now, if you'll move down to the second section, I've listed for you the amount of debt service that we have allocated, that this is restricted to schools. So the amount of debt service that we have for the schools in this fiscal year is $14.3 million, which has increased $1.1 million over the prior year. This is the first full year that the Benhaven debt was seen. And for the current year, Irwin Elementary, that we've not yet completed, we are scheduled to make a debt payment this year of $692,000. The full impact of the Irwin debt borrowing will be realized in next year's fiscal budget, when that payment will go up to $2.3 million. Now, like I said, it seems like we've got a lot of money, but when you start breaking it down, we really don't. So when you see that our debt service is going up, the revenue is not going up to meet it. So keep that in mind as you're looking at your CIP, when it talks about we would have to issue debt to fund those projects. So then, when you issue debt, how do you repay it? You know, several options. Right now, the general fund is putting in $11 million every year to cover the shortfall of this revenue. So just keep that in mind as you move forward. So what I want to impress upon you, and I will not go through the rest of these slides because they all are the same. What I will tell you is that these fiscal policies are more or less to give you a framework of how to make your decisions. You've been presented the CIP fund today. So you're being asked to make decisions and to rank your decisions based on certain factors. This document, the fiscal policy, when you decide to start making a decision, ask yourself, if I make this decision, will I still be within my approved policies? If I am, that's good, but also keep in mind there are a lot of other needs that are out there. I will say that when we first started this fiscal policy, putting it before the board every year, and I told Commissioner McCoy that I would use her as an example. We talked about the fiscal policy, and then I think our next work session we were talking about issuing some debt. I think it was. I'm not exactly sure what it was about. But I remember Commissioner McCoy and everyone was looking at the papers and documents, and Commissioner McCoy asked a question. She said, well, if we approve this, what is that going to do to our fund balance policy or our unassigned fund balance percentage? Those are the questions you need to be asking yourself as you move forward, deciding on how to rank your CIP, and also economic development, economic growth. When you're being asked to fund programs, expansion of programs, new programs, all of that it's a lot of information. But as we start to get through it, we hope that we've organized it so that you'll be able to kind of categorize it and follow it. But also keep in mind, as the trends that are presented in the rest of the presentation this afternoon, that you take a look at compared us to the rest of the county. How do we generate revenue? It's not going to be just, you know, one or two things that you can tweak. It's going to be a combination of a lot of things. But if you'll maintain this fiscal policy, take a look at it, Keep it in mind as you make these decisions. I think you're going to see it'll kind of help you frame how you need to move forward. Any questions? Sorry, I talk fast sometimes. I might be Southern, but I do talk fast sometimes. It's a lot of information. I don't know any other way to give it to you. It's can be very overwhelming, but as I stated, the further we get into discussing individual items, discussing certain events, we can discuss how it will impact it. And
any questions? So what is our debt service percentage now, Kimberly?
hold just a second. Give me just a second. I should have had that out. For this past fiscal year, it was 11.45%. That was our existing debt service versus our expenditures. For assessed value, it's 1.79, and our 10-year payout was at 71%.
Thank you. And our unassigned fund balance, where are we percentage-wise now with regard to?
Right now, we're currently just over 24%.
Okay.
But part of the calculation that we do is at mid-year, we go in and take the unassigned fund balance as of June 30th, and then we update it through December the 31st to allow for any, if there's revenues that are received, like restricted grants or anything that you appropriate to carry forward, we take those into consideration. And we also had, if you will, in your fiscal policy, it also identifies that any capital assets that are sold, that money will automatically go to your capital reserve fund. So when we back that out, you had sold some land, so we had to also back that out. So when we back that out and readjust it, your unassigned is sitting right at about 22%.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? I do have a question that's a little bit off target, just for my information. It's been mentioned a couple of times in here this morning about the fleet fund. Now, it's my understanding that the county purchases the vehicles and then leases them to departments, and that's how we're operating that
Yes, sir.
fund.
That's correct. And this is Paula. I would just like to add to that. We're doing an analysis right now. Renee and Lisa are working on one to see if that model is going to be sustainable. We have talked to outside rental companies,
Right, and I
but we
was
just
aware
feel
of
like
that,
the
but-
best thing is to try to do it in-house to save money. That's what we've done with our IT fund. We used to use a third party to lease all our equipment, and now we self-lease, and we save a lot of money by doing that. And Kimberly and Ira Hall were instrumental in the IT take back of those leases. So we're just trying to do it in-house first, and if it does not work, we'll look at other options. But right now, we're being successful with it.
Well, personally, I applaud you for that. I think that is definitely the way to go. But I know there had been some discussion in prior years about outside leasing for vehicles. So I'm personally glad to see that we didn't go down that road. So thank you. Anything else? Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Honeycutt. I appreciate that. Okay, Ms. Stewart.
Okay, so Renee and Lisa are back up to give our revenue update.
So this will be short. This is Renee. This will be short and sweet. So we like to kind of give you a picture of what revenues look like at the retreat. we haven't done a projection for next year because we don't know enough to be able to accurately project. But it looks like, so we want to be about 3% over what we budgeted in revenue. And we want to be about 3% under what we budgeted in expense. I didn't run the expense calculation, but with the revenue calculation, we're at 3.7% of what we budgeted. We're projected to bring in revenue. Any questions? I will say COVID had some unintentional or unanticipated effects on our revenues, and some were higher and some were lower than what we budgeted. But overall, it's about 3.7%.
Anyone have any questions for Ms. Pascal about that? I think it sounds good in these uncertain times, so thank you.
Thank you.
To financial trends.
Okay. We've got these categorized in 5 different groups. I'll cover the first 3, and Renee will do the second 2, or the last 2. Group 1 is historical context and projected growth. These graphs were not updated from last year because of our data sources. They don't appear to be updating. I think we're waiting on the census information to come in. So in 2019, you can actually see, well, since 2010, you can see the municipalities have only grown about 7%, whereas the unincorporated areas of the county have grown about 17%. And the population in the unincorporated areas expect a higher level of service from the county because they're currently not being served by the towns. Chart 2 is from 2017, and this is just another way to see the projected growth by the townships. And we'll probably expect the townships in the northwest part of the county to increase because of the development. In Chart 3, it's a growing population overall, and as you can see, the historic and projected growth, a lot of these population growth by age are our school-age children and our seniors. And what's important about these 2 groups is that they tend to consume more of our county resources, and it takes more county funding than the working age population. So really the takeaway message from the first group is that we're growing rapidly, we're projected to grow rapidly, but our services will continue to grow, or the demands for our services will continue to grow. And through this presentation, you'll be able to see the challenges we're going to face with funding these increased needs. And group 2 are our economic indicators, and they're kind of mixed. Both are some are better and some are worse than last year. Chart 4 is the annual number of foreclosures in Harnett County, and they have actually fallen substantially since the Great Recession through 2018, and there was a bit of a jump in 2019, but it pretty much fell off the cliff in 2020. And that's the main reason for that is the moratoriums on foreclosures at the state and national levels. Chart 5 is pretty interesting because you can see at the onset of the pandemic, unemployment rate jumped substantially. But we're seeing some recovery now, and the state average and Harnett County averages is right at 6.4%. Chart 6 is the Article 39 sales tax collection for the first 5 months in the last 6 fiscal years. This sales tax is the only part of the sales tax that can really trend because it hasn't changed over the years, and it's indicative of the local economy. As you can see, collections have continued to rise throughout the economic recovery and are even higher in fiscal year 21. Some economists have explained the significant increase because of the people spending more on taxable items and less on non-taxable experiences. We would expect this to drop off if the pandemic worsens. Chart 7 is the register of deeds excise tax by quarters, and the quarters are in fiscal year quarters, so quarter 1 is actually July through September. We've collected more excise tax in the first 2 quarters of fiscal year 21 than in all of fiscal year 15 and 16. Collections are up 36% over the first 6 months of last year. Last year, they were up 26% over the previous year, which is really good news. The revenue itself is not substantial, but land sales indicate potential future growth in our tax base. However, this could be later than sooner if we enter in another recession. Chart 8 is building inspection revenues by quarters. We've collected more building inspections in 2 quarters than we collected in the first 3 for 5 of 6 prior years. While the increased revenue itself doesn't solve our fiscal problems, it's more immediate indicator of a tax base growth and virtually recession-proof. The only way it's not true if these houses are left not completed, which would take a pretty severe recession to cause. These permits won't substantially impact our fiscal year 22 tax revenues, but we'll see them in fiscal year 23. But these revenues for these houses, if these values of these houses are not greater than the past couple of years, the residents who occupy them will consume more county services than they pay in taxes. So our takeaway message on group 2, or the economic indicators, are mixed. Group 3 is kind of going back to what Kimberly discussed with our fiscal policy, and these are indicators of our county fiscal stewardship. Chart 9 is the general fund types unassigned fund balance as a % of the budgeted expenditures. The county has continued to build its reserves with a slight dip in fiscal year 18 and 19 because of capital spending. During the recovery, the county delayed most of its critical capital items. This graph shows our unassigned fund balance since fiscal year 2011, as well as our target fund balance of 20% and the trend in fund balance, which is positive. Chart 9A is a comparison of our available fund balance among jurisdictions our size, which is our comparable population is greater than 100,000. A few weeks ago, Chairman Matthews had asked how our unassigned fund balance compared to the jurisdictions our size. Unfortunately, the only comparison website that we use, or that we get our data source from, they're still using the balances from fiscal year 2019, so that's what we're going with. This graph shows that our available fund balance is below the average for counties our size. Because this category also includes the extremely large counties such as Wake, Mecklenburg, and Guilford, the average fund balance number is skewed. These larger counties have greater budgets and typically less fund balance as a percentage of those larger budgets. If we were able to compare ourselves to those counties with 250,000 or less people, we would likely be well below the average. And Kimberly went into great detail of the difference between unassigned and assigned between the two fund balances.
Lisa, the point is the only measure that we can compare ourselves is available fund balance. And Chairman Matthews had to ask about unassigned fund balance. I know fund balance can be confusing with the various ways that it's measured, but my kind of basic definition of available versus unassigned, and Kimberly can correct me if I'm wrong, is unassigned also deducts what's been appropriated. Otherwise, they're very similar calculations.
So our takeaway message from Group 3 is that we've done a great job managing our finances during the difficult times, and we've made significant progress in restoring the county's finances, and this just emphasizes that the fiscal policy is working.
So the next set of graphs shows the challenges that we face. And this is not as good a news. Our revenues overall, these are our revenues adjusted for inflation and for population. And you can see, for the most part, our revenues have not kept up with inflation and our growing population. The red line in the graph is the trend line, and it is slightly positive only because the fiscal year 2020 revenues caused it to be. Last year when we looked at this graph, the trend line was down. We have gotten some new revenue. The sales tax that has already been mentioned, the Article 46 that was approved in for 2016, and the Article 44 that was approved in 2017. But then we also had a dip in revenues per capita adjusted for inflation in 2018 and 2019. So you heard that our sales tax is substantially higher than last year. And again, that's because people are spending more money on goods and services. Goods, they're stuck at home, and less money on non-taxable experiences. We would expect that to change either if the pandemic worsens or if things substantially improve in the summer, people will start going out again and doing things. If the previous trends, so 2020 is a little different because of both the bump in sales tax and also the CARES Act funding that we received from the federal government. If the previous trend holds, that means we have less money to keep up with service demands than before at the outset of the Great Recession. Chart 11. We've done a good job, as you've seen with all the other graphs, of matching our spending to our revenue. And overall, our expenditures per capita have declined. And you would expect that somewhat because of economies of scale. As you have more people and do more things, then you're able to do them more cost effectively. You see that there's kind of a U-shaped spending pattern because we resumed capital spending largely in 2017 and in 2018. The reduction in 2020 is because of less demand for service during the pandemic and also less services available. Chart 12. So this is the graph that Chairman Matthews asked, or the issue that Chairman asked about earlier, which compares our fund balance target of 15%, no more than 15%, to what our actual, our debt service target of 15% to what our actual debt service has been over the past 10 years. And you will see that we have bumped up and actually exceeded our debt service target a couple of years. In addition, if we issue new debt for the substantial school needs that we have, then we will be well in excess of that 15%. Chart 13. This shows our sales tax per capita in constant dollars, and it shows the massive impact that sales tax has had on our revenues. The quarter cent was added in fiscal 2016, and the new half cent was added in fiscal 2017. Again, sales tax is not the best revenue to rely on because it's highly volatile and will decline substantially during a recession. Next chart. So this shows our restricted intergovernmental revenue, again, adjusted for people and inflation. And I think every county in the state of North Carolina has a similar story to tell. Because in 2011, the state took over the Medicaid expense, and so our revenue has declined as a result, but so has our expense. You see the slight bump up in 2020, because of the CARES Act funds, which we will also receive some of those funds for 2021. So property tax, this again is adjusted for inflation and population, is our largest and most stable revenue source, and for the most part, it is recession-proof. Only motor vehicle taxes and business equipment taxes tend to decline during a recession. The growth in our register of deeds, excise tax, and our building permits indicate this will continue to grow. However, as you'll see in a minute, this growth is not keeping up with residents and inflation. Chart 16. So this is a comparison. This, as Lisa said, 2019 is the latest data available from the State Treasurer's website, which is where we pull this information. And you can see that you can see Harnett County in gray and the average for our population group in blue. Our water and sewer revenues, though, really skew these figures. And if you look at sales and services, we are considerably higher than the average for our population group. We're $435 per person, and the average is $131. So we also did this graph with the water revenues subtracted out. Thanks. So this really shows you where the real issue is with our challenges to provide service. Our property tax revenue per person is just $495, compared with the average of $763 per person for counties our size. This really illustrates the funding challenges we have. When you look at total revenues per capita, the average for our population group is $1,362, and I subtracted debt proceeds from that. While our average while Harnett County's average revenue is $1,132. This means that we have $230 less per person in revenue to address the service demand because of low property tax values, the only substantial revenue we control. Next graph. So let's look at why this may be the case. First, there's no problem with our property tax collections. Our property tax collection percentage for fiscal 19 was 99.61. The average for our population group is 99.39. So we do better than the average county our size. Our collection percentage dropped a bit in 2020, and one reason was out of our control because the state extended the deadline to pay motor vehicle taxes by 5 months, and that affected our collection rate. It's not our tax rate either. This chart compares our tax rate to surrounding counties, kind of in the orange or rust color. We're in green, and the state average is in purple, and you can see that we are on the higher end of tax rate, and we've maintained that tax rate so that we are able to provide the services that we need to provide. Chart 20. So this starts to give us some clue, even though this is good news. Each year, the Department of Revenue compares sales values or a sampling of sales values with the assessed value of properties that sold, and it's called the sales assessment ratio. There's still a few counties in the state who have a sales assessment ratio above 1, and as you can see, that was true for us until 2017. Ours, though, has really dropped in the last 4 years, which indicates that sale values exceed tax values, now on average about 9%. So our planned 2022 revaluation will help capture that value and indicates a good, and all indications are that there's a good housing market in Harnett, and that could help improve the revenue that we have available to provide service. Chart 21. This chart really shows the main problem with our revenue sources. While our assessed values per capita are increasing slightly, and this graph is not adjusted for inflation because the data source that we use does not do that. When you compare our per capita values with the rest of the state, get this, we rank 95th out of 100 counties in assessed values per capita. What does that mean? That we're the 5th lowest county in the state in terms of being able to generate property tax revenue, which is our main revenue source. The average real property tax paid by houses built in 2019 was $1,588. That barely pays the cost of a student in Harnett County schools if you subtract other sources of revenue, and that cost is $1,493. We also spend on average $722 per household on public safety, our next highest spending category. You can see that residential development, at least our residential development, does not pay for itself because the values are so low. So this graph shows that we have a higher than average residential real property tax base. And this is only real property. It doesn't include business personal or personal property or motor vehicles. And this is the only way we're able to get this data from the state to do this comparison. So this might lead you to conclude that economic development is the answer, and it certainly is part of the answer. However, the county with the highest portion of residential values, Chatham, ranks 13th in the state in per capita values. It's second on the list behind only Mecklenburg County of Piedmont counties. So beach and mountain counties tend to have high values and low permanent populations, and so that skews their per capita values. They're really high. But again, Chatham is number 13 on the list, the second Piedmont County, and Harnett County ranks 95th out of 100 counties. So Chatham has really very little commercial and industrial tax base. They're generating those values from their high residential values. We do need to increase our commercial and industrial tax base to help offset our lower than average per capita values, but we also need to increase the value of residential property. We are a bedroom community, just like Chatham, but the housing being built here has much less value. I used to argue with my Chatham commissioners that we needed more economic development to offset our residential development, and that is true in Harnett, but it's only part of the picture. For the foreseeable future, residential values will compose the majority of our tax base. We're also hamstrung by the fact that 12% of our values are exempt from paying property taxes, and that includes Fort Bragg and Campbell University, among others. And this last chart is a good way to end because it summarizes our overall challenges in Harnett County. So our median household income, which is if you take the middle household income, you rank all the household incomes and you take the middle number, is pretty decent. It is $55,619, and we rank 27th in the state, but below the state average. So even though we're 27th in the state, the higher end counties skew that number. Our per capita income, though, which is what this graph is 22% below the state average, and we rank 84th out of 100 counties. So let that sink in for a second. The state, so when I looked at our per capita values and our per capita income, I thought, well, we're only a Tier 2 county because of growth. We would be a Tier 1 county, which is the most economically distressed counties that the state ranks on economic development. But I forgot that the state uses median household income rather than per capita income. You can use, everybody uses median household income, but that doesn't take into account that you have large households with kids. And last year, our household size was 4th highest in the state. Per capita income matters because it indicates the resources our residents have available to pay for things like their county property taxes. And their ability to pay is lower than in many counties. We're the 16th lowest, but our biggest expense is educating children. So per capita income does matter because it helps generate money to pay for schools. Both our per capita income and our per capita values matter greatly to our finances. Both are low in comparison to other counties and represent the challenge we face in financing services for a growing population. We do need to increase our property values. Many things are already in motion to do that, like revaluation. Our tax office is also looking at ways to improve the tax auditing process to capture more of the value that's already there. Our Development Services Department is looking at ways to strengthen some of the regulations for housing, which will also increase value. And that concludes our presentation. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
This is Commissioner McCoy. I have a question, and I don't know how to present it, but since we have more areas in our county that is unincorporated compared to those that are incorporated, how does that affect our revenue? And I'm sure it has some effect.
Ms. McCoy,
Providing with the services.
I'm sorry, Commissioner McCoy, it does not necessarily affect our revenue. What it does affect is our demand for service. So the people who live in the unincorporated areas, a lot of them are moving from places, and they, from different parts of the country, and they expect a higher level of service. And so they expect us to provide municipal services.
Okay, so it affects our services, so, yeah.
How much we spend
Yes.
on services.
How much we spend on services. That's a question I've always wanted to ask, so you have answered my question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else have a question for Ms. McFadden or Ms. Pascal? All right, thank you so much. I think you've done an excellent job of sharing that data with us. We certainly don't seem to have many questions, so thank you again.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you, Lisa. We appreciate that. And as you can see, just kind of to wrap it up with that part, before we do lunch, we have some challenges ahead of us. You've heard them, and this is the time we need to figure out what we can do different. One thing we've been doing, we've been trying to enhance our standards for housing. That's one of the things, that's why we did the growth plan, and we're changing our UDO, Unified Development Ordinance, and making things a little stricter to increase our value. So there are some things we've been doing along the way, but as this data shows, it's not enough at this point. We've still got to, there's more things we need to do, and we're here to talk about options for increasing revenues going forward.
And if we increase the amount of workforce housing, that's not going to increase our revenues either.
What about, if we, retail, could that even help us?
I'll let Coley take that one.
Definitely, and that's one thing that we're working strong on, and Harnett County is a unique animal because it has water and sewer in unincorporated areas.
Right.
So that's going to allow the municipal service, if you will, with the lack of identity, especially we saw a lot of that happen out in Western Harnett in 07, 08, 09, and that particular bubble. Now you're seeing the exact same thing happen in Northwest Harnett with the thousands and thousands of homes that are coming in those particular areas that are unincorporated. However, as Paul and Renee and Lisa mentioned, when people move into this particular area, they demand the service of a municipality, and that's what the county is having to look at as far as more code enforcement, more sheriff's department. You can go on and on down that list, and that is what it's so expensive. As Commissioner Weatherspoon knows, being mayor of a former town in Angier, that growth that is happening there is just overwhelming because it's coming so fast, and so that's what we're up against. So one thing that, as Paula mentioned, that Development Services is doing is that our standards really for the county is comparable to a municipality because we allow such the density there. So if you do curb and gutter, sidewalks, street trees, landscaping at the entrances, things of that nature, we will allow that developer more density, but you get a better product. So that's the tax value that Renee is referring to as well, as far as not just a cheap starter home, if you will, and you're just bombarded with that. And that's where all your school system comes in, the kids, and you just heard all the facts and figures of what it's going to take to put that in place. Mr. McCoy, to answer your question about retail, that will come. Unfortunately, you have to have the rooftops for the retailers to get in gear to make that happen. And we are looking at flex space. We're looking at when people move into areas and you get 6, 7, 8,000 people moving into a certain section of our county, it's going to demand more pharmacy, more banks, more restaurants, more retail, and you'll start to see that follow. Unfortunately, you're just not there yet. Your municipalities, total municipalities of 5 we have with Dunn, Irwin, Coates, Lewington, Angier, only equal 26,000 people. So that's the point as far as what we're looking at as far as the future growth that's coming in. When I was manager in Angier, I spent a lot of time in Cary, Apex, Holly Springs, and Fuquay looking at that growth, looking at the good and the bad. What would you do different knowing what you knew 10 years ago? That's kind of where we're at right now. The Greenway plans, the policies, the fiscal policies that you're putting in place, that is what is so important to keep that balance of what we're after and what we're trying to do here in our county. So it will come. It's just a matter of laying that foundation, putting ourselves in position for that to happen, and then just looking at economic development opportunities to help keep the job force back in our county.
Well, I just want to add a little something to that. Simply because in the past, I've been here, I was born and raised here. And in the past, for us to get retail growth and places like restaurants and nice restaurants and all of that, it was always told to me, based on population. We got population now. So we got to do something about gaining some kind of revenue from retail growth, as well as economic development. Because these are the two things that's going to kind of balance out our revenue here. And with areas growing up in this county that is large as a town, that's something to think about. And it's happening in more cases than one. You know what I mean?
Yes, ma'am, I totally agree with your point. And as Commissioner Nickel knows, in the district that he serves, there was development standards, architectural standards that were put in place on that commercial corridor of 87, where Walmart and all those particular fast food areas at. Think about if you didn't have those standards in place, what you would have got. I would highly encourage you as a board to looking at in Northwest Harnett as you get more flex space coming in, you get more retail coming in, and then that way you can kind of look and manage that particular area as far as the quality of growth that you bring in. You are correct. Rooftops means a lot. They also look at disposable income, and our household medium income is very low. And that's what we've got to help build up, and your standards will help a lot with that. So it's a balance.
It's a balance, but then too you got to think about, keep in mind that over 65 or more percentage of our employees in this county, people that's working people, go out of the county for jobs.
That's a good point.
And that hurts us too.
You're right.
That really hurts this county.
That's
So we
true.
gotta put our heads together, start thinking about something to offset this stuff. We can't continue to talk about it and not do anything about it. That's all I'm saying.
I agree. Totally agree.
Mr. Price, I have a question. This is Commissioner Johnson. What would you say the population of the new growth in Northwest Harnett is with all the new houses coming in?
Yeah, so Andrew's got a little over 1,200 homes coming in just that city limit area. Lillington's got about the same. That's a lot of growth for a small town. Andrew's population is only 5,800. Lillington's only 3,600. So when you start talking about adding that kind of growth so fast, that's just overwhelming. In Northwest Harnett, Commissioner Johnson, you got close. There's probably over 5,000 homes. And I think one thing that we probably need to do is bring in development services more often to you to give you graphs and charts. What we've got is we've got a bubble map that I really like that shows every subdivision in particular areas, and it kind of bubbles off exactly how many lots are going in. That way you get a better feel for that. We're out here in the trenches every day seeing this, meeting with these developers and understanding that. But I think as a board, once you see that, I don't know if monthly's overkill, it may not be as much as we're growing, but you would get a better feel. And Commissioner Nickel, you've already experienced that with where you sit, especially as a real estate agent and seeing that particular area. But you're going to see that continue, Commissioner Johnson. The sale of land, the farmland that's going away, it just blows my mind. If I go drive and wait 2 or 3 weeks, I see survey stakes everywhere, and they're just ready to develop again.
I got a call last night from a resident up around Northwest Harnett that said, come up here and let me show you what's going on.
I agree.
Said our farms are disappearing.
I just rode the whole area 2 weeks ago with a developer and a real estate capital broker, and I'll be glad to do that with any commissioner, just to take you down the back road, show you what's happening. Jay, Mark, and I know it like the back of our hands, so I'll be glad to do that at any
May
time.
need to, this is Paula, we may need to schedule that. We've done that before. We've done tours with the board after a board meeting in the past, and that's probably something we need to look at doing with the new board.
Yeah, if COVID would calm down, we could grab a bus from Hart's and kind of take you around and show you some of these areas where when you see it, it's a little different.
7,500 homes you're talking about?
Where?
The new 7,500 homes you're just talking about?
Uh-huh.
How many of those are occupied with families now? Or are they just planned houses?
Some of them are on the ground, some of them are planned, some of them are already approved. I can get you more data on that, just to kind of get you a better feel of the percentage of what's there.
Selling price of these houses?
Question?
It was about 188,000.
You know,
It's
it may
less
be a
than, it's
touch
less
more.
than,
Yeah.
it's less than 200,
Yeah.
and that's one of our problems. We need it to go up.
Put a restriction on a builder to build a better, more expensive house.
That's part of it. I mean, that's part of the equation, yeah.
Right.
Increasing your
Can't do that.
standards.
Can't do an impact fee.
No.
This house.
What's going to determine that is unfortunately, you are affordable housing for Wake County. That's exactly what's happening, because Wake County has run out of land. So now everybody's found Harnett, and they've come right over the line, and that's what they're putting in. The price of land and your standards will dictate the price of a house. Simple as that. It takes a lot to develop a piece of property nowadays, a lot. When you do water, sewer, streets, and everything in between, that's a lot of money. But what's going to develop that price point is the standards and what they had to pay for the land.
If Harnett County's looking property, maybe we ought to go up there and start buying some tracts. Keeping them from development.
You have a grand opportunity to kind of mold and shape this particular area. Paul, it was probably, about a year and a half ago, we did the Northwest Small Area Plan that I applaud the board for putting that in place. That is a small area plan in the big comprehensive plan that we have, that it was just in Northwest Harnett, and it looked at 4 categories. It looked at transportation, utilities, land use, and protecting our natural resources. Very well put together document. I feel that needs to be looked at on an annual basis. If it needs to be strengthened, if it needs other things that this board sees priority on, I think that needs to be looked at heavily. That will mold and shape your retail, your commercial, and your industrial.
Do you know how many retail businesses have come into that area in the last 2 years?
Not that many.
That feed these new houses? You don't know?
Well, they're all going to Fuquay, unfortunately. I mean, they still have, the restaurants, the fast food. So, and we have been talking to a lot of folks, and they're looking at doing what we mentioned with this group a few weeks ago about the flex space. I think that's what you're going to see more of, because you can put that on the ground pretty quick. And as these households come in here, Ms. McCoy, they're going to demand that service. So they're not going to want to drive 5, 6, 7 miles to go get something and come back. So your grocery stores will start coming in, your pharmacies, your banks, your restaurants, all that will come true to form and go back to back.
Well, the guy that called me wanted me to meet him over there to look at this area where all the farms are disappearing.
Uh-huh.
He said, meet me for lunch. And I said, where at? He said, we'll meet in Fuquay.
Well, there you go. That's right.
Definitely a bedroom community.
No doubt.
Saddest thing is that we're using our citizens as humans on a tax farm, so got to start generating something for them. I really want to see something implemented where we are, like, focus on that 9-digit zip code. I mean, that right there with,
Big deal.
I think that is going to definitely give us at least something for right now, and that's something that I think we can do now.
I agree. That is a big deal. And Kimberly showed you the sales tax figures of what was happening there. And I'll tell you what's happening with that. People are staying at home and they're going to grocery stores. They're not eating out as much. So all their sales tax dollars that were leaking into Cumberland and Wake are staying here in Harnett. So, but that's a good point. That 9-digit is huge, because I see that FedEx, UPS, Amazon truck go by my house constantly, and the wheels are about to fall off. So we've got to take advantage of that. I think everybody's on the same page. It's just a matter of, let's hear from the board with your priorities. Let's figure out how to finance it. And we all know that broadband and economic development is our top priority. So let's roll up our sleeves and figure out how to make it happen.
We're done.
Yes, sir.
I agree, stop talking about it. Talked about it and watched it long enough, so.
And we've learned a lot. We learned a lot from Western Harnett. We can learn a lot from our neighbors to the north about what worked and what didn't.
Right.
Any other questions, comments? Ms. Stewart, you want to?
We will break for lunch
Take
if
a break
that's.
for lunch?
Yeah, let's go ahead and
Okay.
break for lunch, and we don't have to continue since we got through the main programs. We can just eat, and then we can come back and pick back up in maybe 20 minutes or so. I don't know how much time y'all want, but this, whatever y'all want.
Sounds good.
So we'll be in recess for 15 to 20 minutes.